The Insider Exclusive analyzed 5 years of federal crash data. We added up the fatalities county by county, road by road during that entire period. And we found that between 3,500 and 5,000 people are killed in truck crashes on our nation's highways every year. Although that's the equivalent of a commercial airplane crash occurring every week, there is a general lack of awareness on the part of the motoring public about this problem. Estimates suggest that fatigue is a major factor in up to 30% of fatal crashes and 15% of serious injury crashes. Fatigue also contributes to approximately 25% of insurance losses in the heavy vehicle industry. Driver fatigue is particularly dangerous because one of the symptoms is a decreased ability to judge one's own level of tiredness. Research has shown that not sleeping for more than 17 hours has an effect on driving ability, the equivalent of a blood alcohol concentration of 0.05. Not sleeping for 24 hours has the same effect of having a blood alcohol concentration of 0.10. In the best of conditions, tractor-trailers are dangerous vehicles simply due to their size and weight. The average semi can carry more than 40,000 pounds of cargo, let alone the mass of the truck, fuel, and the trailer. The average passenger vehicle, on the other hand, weighs only 4,000 pounds, a deadly match in any collision. In this Insider Exclusive Network TV special, Justice in America, Joe Forbes Story, our news team visits with Dino Tangredi of Dino Tangredi Law in Watertown, Massachusetts, to discuss how he successfully won a $2.9 million verdict for his client, Joe Forbes, who was killed when Wiley Hooks Jr., a truck driver for Gregory Trucking of North Carolina, ran a red light in Dalton, Mass., seriously injuring Joe Forbes, who died 2 days later. Gregory Trucking of North Carolina violated federal regulations and its own written safety policy in hiring Wiley Hooks Jr. because he had 5 prior convictions for driving while intoxicated and 18 moving violations. Gregory Trucking chose to hire an unqualified driver because it could pay the driver less than the going rate at the expense of public safety. Dino Tangredi has earned a reputation as an unyielding trial lawyer who repeatedly represents individuals and families against big companies and the Goliaths of the world, and repeatedly wins. He has earned the highest respect from citizens and lawyers alike as one of the best trial lawyers in Massachusetts. He's built a substantial reputation by consistently winning cases other law firms have turned down, and his amazing courtroom skills and headline-grabbing success rate continue to provide his clients with the results they need and the results they deserve. This is the Insider Exclusive, live from Watertown, Massachusetts. Pleasure to introduce Dino Tangredi to the show. Welcome to the show, Dino.
Thank you, Steve.
You're in Watertown, Massachusetts. It's a very historical town.
It can. This is a historical building that we're in.
Tell our audience a little bit about your practice. You are a plaintiff's lawyer. You represent the people who really need help fighting the Goliaths of the world. What type of cases do you generally handle?
Well, Steve, we help victims and their families who have been seriously injured or killed due to the negligence of someone else. And our particular focus these days is on those people injured and killed in large truck or bus crashes.
Hey, we are here talking about one of those crashes. It resulted in the death of your client. His name was Joe Forbes. Tell our audience who Joe Forbes was.
Your question brought forth the hardest part of this case, trying to figure out who Joe Forbes was. He was one of those people, I call him the invisible people among us. Joe was 60 years old, never married, no children, lived in an unheated house in the Berkshires. He wasn't the kind of person that interacted in society very much. He didn't work on a regular basis. Now, he never hurt anybody. He didn't drink. He didn't do drugs. He wasn't a criminal. He was a loner. And trying to bring him back to life during the trial was our biggest challenge. We had to go back to high school to get a photograph of Joe. Nobody who knew Joe had a recent photograph of him. He wasn't the kind of person to be on Facebook or Instagram or any of that stuff.
Didn't he?
He had a driver's license. So the Department of Motor Vehicles, we had a really hard time trying to get his driver's license photograph. And we ultimately gave up on that. We even went to the governor's office to ask for help, and it just never materialized. When you investigate these cases, you go down so many roads, and they always don't produce fruit, as we know. It was about 7 o'clock in the morning in Dalton, Massachusetts, and Joe was driving to a lumber store to get some lumber. And as he went through an intersection, a tractor-trailer truck ran a red light, smashed into the driver's side door of Joe's pickup truck, and forced it into a pole and sandwiched him in the truck. Of course, the police and the ambulance came. They had to use the jaws of life to get Joe out. At the time, Joe was talking. He could communicate. He was complaining of incredible pain. But at the time, the police thought it was just a crash. He'd need to go to the hospital. But they didn't investigate it as a death right away. Joe didn't die for about 48 hours. It's at that point, and when it was too late, to do a thorough investigation.
It's kind of an anonymous person that you're representing. How did the case come to you, by the way?
Well, a lawyer had it from the Berkshires, and he got sick, and literally on his deathbed when I was visiting with him, he asked me to take the case and to try to do the right thing for the Forbes family.
Do these cases to begin with?
That's exactly why we do it. These are real people with real problems. And I love it when people come to me and ask for some help going against, you know, the insurance companies and the corporations that we go against.
In Joe's case, he's passed on. He was a sole support and caretaker to his mother. And his mother was how old? 90 years old, right?
Almost 90 years old when she passed.
Nobody to take care of mom. Mom can't take care of herself. Nobody's helping Joe financially. You enter the picture. Tell us some of the challenges you faced in prosecuting the company that eventually you got a verdict from.
Well, Steve, I kind of have an insider's knowledge of the trucking industry. I used to work for an insurance company, and we insured the largest transportation company on the planet. And I learned when I was at the insurance company the tricks and the tactics that these trucking companies would use at trial to fight these cases. So they have instant response teams. Most of the big trucking companies, within minutes of the crash, they're sending people out to the crash scene, lawyers, investigators, accident reconstructionists. They're on the scene preserving evidence, getting statements, getting information that's going to help them, either in a negative or positive way. And I like to contrast that with where the victims are at that time and their families. They're usually at a hospital or a morgue. And the last thing the families are thinking about is a legal matter, a legal case. And those trucking companies have these teams out there to spin it their way.
Railroad cases where they send out these teams, in crossing guard cases where they haven't cut down, you know, the shrubbery so you can't see anything coming, and they'll mow it down. I've even handled cases, and I remember Anoka, Minnesota, which is outside of Minneapolis, where the team went out and brought liquor and spread, I'm not kidding you, they were fined $30 million. This is Union Pacific, you know, but they slant the case so it's in favor of them. Getting back to this, you know, original question before we get back to the cases, why are people so concerned about not doing the right thing? Because they don't want to take responsibility. They don't want to pay for something that's their fault.
You know, I've been doing this 25 years, Steve, and I've probably taken thousands of depositions, and I'm waiting for the first person that sits across from me and says, I did it, and I'm sorry, I screwed up. There is something in human nature to just be defensive and to protect oneself, I guess. But in most of our cases, there's always independent sources to just prove they're wrong and to catch them in the lie. Right. And we love to try the lie when we find it.
Construct this case so you were successful.
Well, fortunately, because I know how the trucking industry defends these cases, the secrets are really in the government files. Trucking companies are highly regulated by the federal government, as you may know, and they keep records. And through Freedom of Information Acts, we get those records and we go through them. And that's where you always discover the fly in the ointment, as they say, in those records. And in this particular case, Gregory Trucking had so many problems in their past. We were just shocked that they even had a license to operate a trucking company.
To their hiring of drivers and their lack of screening. The driver that killed Joe Forbes, his name was?
Wiley Lenue Hooks.
He had a series of arrests for DUI, right?
Steve, when they hired him, he had 4 convictions, and his 5th was pending at the time of hiring.
Hire him as you can get him on cheap, right?
That was our argument to the jury, my argument to the jury.
The trucking company was Gregory Trucking of North Carolina. So tell me more challenges you face when you have somebody as some entity in another jurisdiction.
Well, that's why we filed a federal lawsuit in this case, because now we can cross state boundaries without any legal issues. And we sued them here in Massachusetts, where they killed Joe, and made them come up here for the trial for a week, and tried this case in front of a jury of regular citizens.
The president of the company, Cecil Gregory, what kind of guy was he?
Cecil, you could never get a straight answer from Cecil. Cecil could talk. Cecil wasn't one of those people who could admit they did something wrong and apologize for it and try to make it right. It was never going to be Cecil's fault, no matter what. Even when you caught him red-handed. I felt bad for his poor secretaries, who was his sister. He put so much blame on her for a lot of the failure to follow the criteria to hire someone properly.
For him, it's the company's responsibility.
Absolutely. Yeah. Cecil should have known that, but he never stood up and took responsibility for anything.
What was the end result of the case?
Well, the end result, to be honest with you, was disappointing to me. I asked the jury for $7 million for Joe. The defense lawyer, the insurance company lawyer, asked the jury for $100,000. The jury came back at 30 times that amount.
That was kind of a stupid move because he's admitting there's some responsibility.
From the beginning, you know, and they talk out of both sides of their mouth.
Right.
They will admit it's their responsibility, but there's always a but. Yeah. It doesn't just end with, we're sorry we did it. Mm-hmm. They say, well, look, there's some circumstances. There might have been a dog that distracted our driver. You know, he didn't see the light because the sun was in his eyes. Again, people who are going to make excuses and not take responsibility for
Prosecute
it.
a case, you investigate it 100%, and you have people that help you. And fortunately, today we have on the show a gentleman by the name of Pat Mason of the Mason Group. He's one of your main investigators. And another person who's worked with you very closely, Jamie Carney, that conducts focus groups to see what the audience or what a potential juror might come back with and what's it worth, what they're looking for, etc. And fortunately, we have them here today, so we're going to bring them on the show right now. It is my great pleasure to introduce Pat Mason and Jamie Carney to the show. Welcome to the show.
It's good to be here.
Thank you for having us.
So Pat, you have an organization, a company called the Mason Group, right? And you are an investigator.
Private investigator.
And what type of investigations do you handle? Criminal and civil?
Yeah, both criminal or civil.
Your background is, were you law enforcement?
No background in law enforcement. 27 years of doing private investigation within the state.
Okay, now you were retained to do an investigation into the Joe Forbes case.
Well, initially after meeting with attorney Tangredi, there was a strategy of how to approach this. We first did a site visit to see if there would be any witnesses that we could find. And then more importantly, we did a video of the intersection. We did it on the date of the anniversary of the incident. So we wanted to get a perspective of traffic coming through that time. Early morning, didn't know really what to expect. So we set up cameras at the corner, the intersections, and just monitored traffic, seeing that it was busy in that Berkshire town of Dalton. It was quite busy, more than I even expected. And the traffic was buses. There was a school bus that went through there just a little prior to incident with Mr. Forbes. So that was kind of the agenda of going out the first time. We subsequently went out 2 more times on the anniversaries, again, to try to get a flavor for really what the traffic was. And again, it was consistent, busy at that time of when the incident.
So let's talk about Gregory Trucking. You investigated them too, right?
We did do a background inquiry into the driver.
And what were some of the highlights that you discovered about the company?
We had gone to all the states that we feel that he would have traveled through. So, and we had to write requests for driving records, and some of them weren't privy to us based on state by state. But there was some incidents that were noted of his driving history that counsel ultimately used in his moving forward with the case.
Now, Jamie, you have a job I would love to do.
Well, the purpose of a focus group is to bring together people and gather their opinions about the case before you go to trial.
If I remember correctly, there were 3 focus groups you did on this case?
At least, I think we did closer to 6.
So how do you just seek out volunteers in the local community, or how do you do that?
So we put it out on the internet, trying to get people from our community that would represent the jury pool, and people that don't have any legal background, and get them to come together and give their feedback on all aspects of the case, from case selection to all the way through to the witnesses and exhibits.
So is there a mock trial, so to speak, or you just present the facts?
There can be. Some types of focus groups are exclusively on the opening statement, what they feel about the way that it's presented, the lawyer, the facts, if there's confusion. And other times it can go all the way to a mock trial once you're closer to, bringing it and seeing how it's perceived.
Well, I want to thank you both for the work you did on the case. Congratulations for the result, and thank you for being here.
Thank you, Steve.
Generally in trucking accidents, right? Who can sue in a trucking accident when you're severely injured?
Well, if you're still alive, of course, you have a cause of action to sue the person who did something wrong. Very often it involves a driver, sometimes a broker, sometimes an owner. Very often the tractor and the trailer are owned by different entities. So there's many different people to investigate and look at to see where the blame really lies.
Fortunately, with all accidents, whether truck accidents or auto accidents, you're severely injured, you're carted off to the hospital. And there's, like you mentioned earlier, the trucking companies, the big ones, they'll send teams out to basically change the evidence or write it in their favor, right? So when you come on board as a lawyer representing somebody severely injured, what is the very first thing your law firm does to find out or get access to the truth?
Well, the police report is always a place to start.
Yeah.
But, you know, we've learned over the years that police don't always get it right. Sometimes they don't have qualified people to investigate these truck crashes. And I'll never use the word accident when I'm talking about these things. You know, an accident is winning the lottery, all right? These are crashes. Steve, every year there's more than 5,000 people killed by tractor-trailer trucks, okay? And every one of them is preventable, okay? They have been rising. In the last 10 years, truck fatalities are up 52% in the last 10 years, while all other automotive crashes are down. Why is that? There's a truck driver shortage. And this case of Joe Forbes exemplifies exactly that theory. You know, businesses aren't going to stop shipping their goods. That's how they make money. They can't get enough drivers, qualified drivers. So they've got to cut corners. And this was a classic case of a corporation choosing to cut corners on safety to save money.
In this shortage of drivers, as you well know, there are companies out there, I think Tesla and even Amazon, that are choosing to have remote drivers. In other words, there's no physical driver in there. How do you see that affecting cases when one of these automatic trucks, for example, mows over and kills somebody? You see that any different in prosecuting a case?
Well, I think it's going to go back to what we were just talking about, and that's profit-driven.
Yeah.
Okay? In the long run, a self-driving tractor-trailer truck is cheaper than having a driver. They can go 24 hours a day. And some drivers are overworked. There's serious regulations on how much they can work, but the need is greater than the ability to fill it. So that's where the people are cutting the corners. Yeah. And it's affecting you and me on the highway, our children, grandchildren. In fact, in the Joe Forbes case, 1 minute after this crash, 1 minute after this man drove through a red light, a school bus with children went right through that intersection. Well, it was scheduled to, it never made it because it was diverted around. But can you think of that carnage?
Case and many other cases, because you've been in this community for a long time, people know of your reputation. You're probably contacted by a number of people to represent them. How do you determine, because you've only got so much time, how do you determine the cases you eventually end up representing?
I can't say there's a formula. Sometimes it's I got to sit there and I got to talk to somebody, and you get a feel for people, Steve, and I can't help them all. This is a people-oriented business that I'm in, and I have to apprise people kind of quickly sometimes. And it's an intangible. I can't tell you what it is, but sometimes it's just the widow of somebody killed, children who come in together, and all they want is the truth sometimes. I don't hardly ever have anybody come into my office and say, how much am I going to get? Most of them want the truth because they know, especially in the truck cases, the truth has been glossed over somehow. So we're happy to help them.
For being on the show. Congratulations. I understand that you've collected $1 million out of the $2.9 million. You're still pursuing that. And perhaps this case and it being televised nationally might help you get justice in the Joe Forbes case. And thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Steve. I appreciate it.
Thanks for joining us. You can get more information about our guest and the issues at insiderexclusive.com.